Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Hackers and Humans podcast. Today we have a very special guest and good friend of the show, Dr. Matthew Canham. And for those of you who don't know Matthew, he is a former FBI special agent, research professor at UCF, and leading expert in human AI integration. He's the co-author of the forthcoming book, Synthetic Media, Deepfakes, and Cyber Deception, Attacks, Analysis, and Defenses, and serves as executive director of the Cognitive Security Institute, a nonprofit focused on evolving security threats in human and artificial intelligence systems. Thank you for coming on the show, Matthew.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this.
Yeah. As I was reading that, I was thinking about the FBI special agent. Are there unspecial agents or just like regular agents, or is everyone a special agent? I've always thought about that.
Well, okay, so if you really want the backstory on that, it started way back before the FBI was actually the FBI. It was the, I believe, BOI. So we're talking early 1900s, Bureau of Investigation. And the reason that agents were special agents was that they were not general agents of the government, meaning that they could not carry out contracts and that sort of thing on behalf of the government. They could only act in limited special ways on behalf of the government. And that's actually where that term comes from.
Interesting. So that's why everyone's a special agent. It's kind of like everyone's a VP at a bank because of like some random signing authority thing.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks for the trivia. So, you've been doing actually, I'd love for you to tell everyone a bit about the Cognitive Security Institute, because I've been joining the sessions. They're really great. And it's been so relevant with everything that's been going on in social engineering and AI. So could you tell us a bit about the CSI?
Yeah, well, thank you. So we are a nonprofit organization, essentially a professional development nonprofit organization, and sort of our bread and butter is that we do weekly online meetings in which we discuss topics in cognitive security. So these can be things like AI security, it can be human-centered cybersecurity. We even do things like cognitive resilience and mental health online. We also have a few in-person meetings that we do, and as well as we are starting to roll out trainings for professional developments for professionals in the space, so development of their skills and abilities. And we're also starting to look at expanding into research in this domain. And so we just funded a very small research project to look at how culture can modify the impact of Cialdini's social influence principles. If you're familiar with these are like reciprocity social proof. And depending on what language that those are presented in, they may be more or less effective given a certain cultural orientation. So that's what we do, and we would absolutely welcome new members. You can apply on the site. Yeah, hopefully we'll see some folks at some of our in-person events in the near future.
Yeah, I've attended, and they've been really fantastic sessions. And what's the website for that again? It's cognitivesecurity.institute. Got it. So you can go there, sign up, and start attending sessions, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. So you're talking a lot about social engineering. Here we go, the name cognitive. Social engineering's been around forever. I'm sure there was some dude in Egypt that was trying to do it to get off building the pyramids or something. What's changed in social engineering recently? Because I feel like I've been hearing more about it. And maybe that's because I have a company that's focused on it now, but it does feel like there's been a notable uptick in it.
So I guess the first thing I would say is, so we have the Cognitive Security Institute because we see that as more of an umbrella term, and social engineering is a set of TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that are housed sort of under that umbrella. And so one of the examples I've been giving is from the movie War Games, the original 1980s movie. If you're familiar with it, the main character uses social engineering to get access to a password to get access to the school system, but uses basically cognitive reverse engineering of a designer of the Whopper program that he's trying to crack. And this is the program that's the DoD program. Basically reverse engineers a backdoor password that designer and developer put into that system. And so in one case, you have someone who's deliberately manipulating somebody else. That's a case of social engineering. But in the other case, he is reverse engineering the thought process of somebody that he believes to be deceased. And that would be an example of cognitive security. And so to your point about that this has been around for a very long time, yeah, I suspect that there are near cousins of ours, bonobos and chimpanzees that are manipulating each other out of, bananas and so on and so forth. And what has changed really in the last 30 years or so has been this connectivity that we have. So what this does is it massively shifts the advantage to the attacker's favors, because they can be in a jurisdiction that is outside of the legal reach of the victim, the country of the victim is habitating in. And what this allows the attackers to do is it allows them to basically try a lot of different techniques, fail a lot, because every time they win there's a huge upside, but when they lose there's very little downside other than time wasted. And so this has massively shifted the dynamic in this regard. Now, what we have been seeing in just the past 3 or 4 years is this increase in AI capability, both in terms of like LLMs, large language models, but also the capability for using synthetic media. So you'd mentioned the book at the outset in the intro. This is like deepfake technology or generative AI, synthetic media, this kind of thing to actually generate voices. And we can get more into this later, but we're actually starting to see semi-autonomous bots, both text-based and voice, that are able to manipulate people. So now it gives the attackers to operate at a scale that they had never had before.
Yeah, I know a few people building something like that. It's to kind of parlay that through an industry lens. When we were first getting started at Mirage, I was talking to CISO of a bank who had a military background, and what he said to us was like, look, voice phishing is a bigger problem now, because the other thing stopping the adversaries from doing it was, one, like access to telephony grid, right? You had to do long distance calling, is expensive. Well, that's gone. You can go spin up an account. Twilio, there's so many ways to just like get into our phone network in the United States. And then two was just like weird accents, or foreign accents rather, and grammar. And those are just solved. They can use voice changers and they can ask ChatGPT. And level one that we've been seeing is, the attackers anywhere in the world can act like they're anywhere in the United States. And it's really hard to tell and even clone. And what we're starting to see is, the autonomous stuff. And at Mirage, we've been building this for training, and it's pretty scary what it can do already. So in a couple of years, there's going to be a darknet version of what we're building for bad purposes. And yeah, that's going to be pretty frightening.
Well, and I've heard already a few instances where attackers have used they built into their pretext that they're using a bot. And so it'll say, obviously, I'm an AI construct, but I'm calling on behalf of, and fill in the blank, and then it goes ahead and it gives you a story for why it is an AI bot. And so this sort of covers, first of all, this covers detection, right? Because if something detector in place that says this is AI generated audio, well, it answers that question right there in the mind of the target. And then if there's any sort of funny, pauses or responses, then the person understands, oh yeah, right, I'm talking to a bot. But then it launches right into its attack.
So it's like I'm an AI assistant person, and people are already used to that?
Well, I think we're going to get more and more used to it.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'd love to hear that call. Got it. So AI is kind of an enabler to all this. You mentioned detection. It's really interesting. I'd love to get your thoughts on detection. I'm really biased on detection. I have friends, a company that I've invested in that builds text-to-speech systems, and their view is like, hey, if you build a detector, great, you built a discriminator for me to just train against. So in adversarial learning and machine learning, and there's a lot of papers on people going and trying to build, spam detectors, and then realizing, oh, we actually just built the best way to generate spam because now we have something that we can train against. So it's kind of, so I don't know, my view is that a lot of these artifacts are going to go away. It's going to be really, really hard, and it's going to be watermarking, but it's not going to be accurate enough. Overnight, something can change, and then it doesn't work anymore. Like, the early image detectors, we're looking at things like, oh, it would learn automatically, oh, there's, too many fingers on that hand. And then Midjourney got updated to version 3 and it went away and everything went broke. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I'm very bearish on detection.
Yeah, well, I mean, detection has its place, right? But I think where it goes askew is where people place too much faith in it, I guess, is the way to say that. Just because you've detected something by itself, that's somewhat meaningless. So a minute ago, I gave the example of the thing just opening with the pretext of, hey, I am an AI bot calling on behalf of fill in the blank. So that's one way to get around detection right there. You brought up adversarial learning. This is huge. And this isn't new, right? When malware detection became a thing, that's one of the first things we saw, is that the criminals then went out and got subscriptions to all of the malware detection platforms, and then they would run their payloads through that to see if it would be detected by the malware detectors, and it had the ability to then let them improve their payloads. And so we're seeing the same thing right now with deepfake and synthetic media. The last thing that I'll say about that, though, is that I think what we are going to see over the next, say, 5 years is progressively that people are using synthetic media more and more into their legitimate everyday conversations, right? We've already seen this with, I think it's like the beauty filters in Instagram and these sorts of things. Pardon me, I'm not a social media person, so I don't keep up on this stuff.
The TikToks, I saw a filter that they're filters, right?
Yeah. Well, and so you get like the little cat ears or whatever, right? And so, yeah, so I actually know somebody who likes to jump into Zoom calls as Elon Musk. Just, it's his thing, you know? And I think that that's going to become more and more common. And as it becomes more common, it'll become accepted. Much in the same way that if you look at, say, 2018, 2019, there were people who were using LLMs to help them write content. And a few of these people were accused of plagiarism or some variation on plagiarism. And now, I mean, I would be lost in some of my writing if I wasn't relying on ChatGPT to help me write some of the content. And so you get this weird sort of blend of human and AI, this partnership. And I think what we're going to see is something very similar with synthetic media. But to your original point, what does that do for detection? Well, it unfortunately doesn't really do a lot for detection because you're going to detect a lot of false positives. And if you're constantly detecting false positives, you're sort of right back at square one, where you got a fire hose of positives versus no negatives, or excuse me, no positives. And so then you're sort of still stuck in this boat of no information. So I think where we really need to focus is intentionality. Can we detect what the intention is behind that person or that bot, that agent that's interacting with you?
Yeah, I'm with you. And if you look at, malware is a really good analogy because, we don't call it antivirus anymore, right? The endpoint protection is looking at behaviors of processes, right? Those things have evolved too, because it was just kind of like a rat race that you're always going to lose. That's not, you only have to be wrong once, and then you get hacked. So, yeah, I'm definitely like aligned on that piece. I would throw in that one piece of advice for everyone. If people are using your voice as your password on your bank, call now and deactivate it, because I don't like. The people that create the technology have a huge incentive to say that, oh yeah, it's definitely secure, it's going to work, because they're doing the detection piece as well. And this isn't just me saying this. Like OpenAI had put, when they were releasing their paper on their voice engine, put like, you should not use voice as authentication anymore. So don't just trust me, trust the people that are building these systems, that are making the AIs talk. So augmentation, yeah. What else are you seeing kind of change in social engineering with that kind of, introduction of AI?
Well, what I see sort of on the horizon, this is not really, well, let me back up. Actually, I just in a conversation today heard a red teamer say that his favorite new target is agents that are within the, on the inside of an organization, so kind of behind the firewall per se. And so I think something that we are going to start seeing more of is social engineering targeting AI agents. And this is, I think that this will be very interesting when this happens. And there's a few things at play here. One is that I think for economic reasons, we are going to see the rise of the agentic web very soon. And so when we saw the adoption of ChatGPT, I think, I might be wrong about this, but I believe that ChatGPT was the fastest adopted technology in history. And I don't remember exactly what the metric was. Maybe it was like 80% saturation of the market or whatever, but it did it like in weeks versus like a mobile phone, which took years. And what this agentic web is going to do is to, right now, when we do something online, we manually have to go in and book an airline flight or a car or whatever, service for your house. And I think we're coming to a point very, very quickly where we will have AI agents that will do this on our behalf. We just say something and it just takes care of it, gives us a message and says, okay, this thing is scheduled and you're ready to go. What that does is that gives a massive incentive to cyber criminals to now start targeting these AI agents, because if that agent has the ability to access your credit card or your bank account, now that's a financial incentive for criminals to go after that agent. And not only that, but that agent now becomes a pivot point to attack you as an individual as well. And so another area that we're starting to see these is in the areas of sort of replacing recommendation engines. And so it is massively changing right now. And in fact, that's how I'm using LLMs primarily right now today, is to look for things on the web and bring me curated results. And the problem with that is that humans have a tendency to overtrust automated systems. And so there was something called the search engine manipulation effect, where people rarely go beyond the second page of search engine results, and usually only the first 4 or 5 search engine results. And we're coming to a point where you won't even see those pages, right? You'll just see, hey, here's your recommendation. And so this becomes an attack vector against that human, as well as the incentive for cyber criminals to go after that agent, which is the financial aspect. When you combine these things together, I think we've got a very interesting future for social engineering.
Definitely. When your friend said that your red team friend said that they're going after, are they actually doing this today?
Yeah.
They're going like internal agents, like a support bot, or?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in many companies, these things are trusted entities, right? So if you can get in and you can compromise that agent and get it to start doing things on your behalf.
I remember talking to a company a while ago that they were looking at the problem of like, how do we do permissions and security for AIs or agents? And my take was like, well, we can't figure this out for people, so we're not going to figure out. It's the same problem, right? It's like,
right.
It's a permission system, like for data. There's a company called Glean that's like on a tear. I don't know if you heard of these guys, but they're basically like a search engine for all of your internal data. It's like Google used to a search appliance you could use. We had it when I was working at a big bank. This is like that on steroids, right? It's indexing like everything in Google Drive, everything in your wikis, and it's very eminently useful. And they're using that to basically build a knowledge assistant on top of that. And one of the issues of adoption I've heard is like, yeah, they go to a big company. The company is like, how do we do permissions? Because before, even though everything was like available on the internet, no one knew how to find it. So de facto, it was kind of obfuscated. But when everything's there and you can search it, it actually gets really dangerous. So a lot of companies are really evaluating how do we, segment and put permissions on all of these different pieces of knowledge. And I had no idea how to do that.
That is very interesting, and I know that there's been a little bit of a controversy on this, even on like Claude and ChatGPT and some of the others that are ignoring the robots' TXT files, and they're going and they're
the crawlers are, or the companies are. Anthropic, the company, I don't know the list of who's doing it, but the companies are ignoring the robots' TXT and just scraping and hammering everything.
And I didn't mean to call out those companies specifically, but I know that this has been a problem generally speaking. And I don't know, this is a question I just don't know the answer to, is whether that is something that's endemic to the model or if that's done purposely or a little bit of both.
Probably a little bit of both. My understanding of the crawlers, or those are the crawlers they're using to feed their database to go and train the models. And they're just kind of ignoring it. I mean, this is, since the beginning, it's the original sin of these things, right? We don't know how many YouTube videos OpenAI scraped to train Sora. They won't talk about it. So there's kind of this awkward thing going on. And also just like a reframing of knowledge, which I think is really interesting. Like we've all accepted that a derivative of the work from an AI is not copyright anymore. So, which is interesting. Like we've all created information to train this thing, but there's no way to like tie it and do attribution back to it. So we're in this weird phase of just, if it got scraped, then it's good, and you have no like stake in ownership or any claims on this thing. And that's a pretty new concept, I think.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a major legal struggle over probably the next at least 20 years, maybe more, figuring out exactly how to define this and how it's protected, whether it's protected. Something I've been thinking about lately is, are we entering an era where we're going to see the end of books? And where I've been thinking about this is that there was an age before books, right? And very intelligent people even before books existed, and they would generate and preserve knowledge orally through communication or through oral tradition, this sort of thing. I almost wonder if we're going to go back to the future, in that we are going to start just having conversations with our AIs in a similar sort of way.
Interesting. Kind of on the topic of manipulating AIs, I think you mentioned something to me in the prep we did around machine psychology. Can you tell us about what that is and how it applies to all this?
Yeah. So what machine psychology, it's a new and emerging field, and essentially what it does is it treats the AIs as a black box. So assuming that you can't look behind the hood and see how the algorithm is actually operating, what can you infer about those models just based on behavior? And there was a paper that just came out within the last couple of weeks, basically looking at how there was 6 different models, Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, all the main ones. And it was looking at how these models responded to social influence techniques. And it was interesting that it found that universally across the models that they had tested, all of the models responded more positively to social proof, meaning that it would grab sort of social proof messages. And I think that they were looking at customer evaluations of products. And so if you had these customer evaluations that had social proof messaging in them, so like we or all of our customers or all of our users like this particular thing, the LLMs universally would amplify those messages. And the other technique that they found that they responded very well to, which I think is hilarious, is something called discount framing. And this is where you mark something down, say like 50%. But if you mark that product up 100%, so you double the price, and then you give a 50% discount, these models would still amplify those advertisements because of this 50% discount, not accounting for the fact that it was still the same price as it had originally been. So these are examples of how the models will operate almost on a behavioral sort of level without really looking at the algorithms behind the curtain. And I think that this is an interesting way to look at it, because we are going to form these relationships with these models. And when we do, understanding a little bit about the psychology of how these things operate is going to be very important for people to understand. The thing that I do mention to people quite a bit is that it's very important to remember that these models are psychopaths in the truest sense that they possibly can be, right? They have no empathy, even though they can project the language of empathy, right? So they can project the right words to say, but they have no feeling to go underneath that. So this is another example of psychology of the machines, right? This machine psychology. And so I think that this is going to be something that is going to be used as a tool by malicious actors, but it's also something very important for users of these devices to also understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. There was another really good paper that came out in January from OpenAI called Training Inference Time Compute for Adversarial Robustness. And for those listeners that don't know about these models, O1 and O3, OpenAI has these models that, for all intents and purposes, they kind of think, right? So when you ask the question, at the time you ask the question, it's actually going, and there's this chain of thought you can read, and it's like almost like thinking out loud. And they found that, like, well, actually, this chain of thought makes jailbreaks, like, a lot less likely, because it can be like, oh, this seems suspicious, I shouldn't be doing that. And like, a lot of people witness this and just talking to these models. There's more refusals for things. But what they found is that there's 2 categories where you can trip it up. One is nerd sniping. You could basically force it to just keep thinking and go in this crazy loop, and it almost forgets what happened, because as a context, it's too large. It kind of forgets what it was doing effectively. And the other one is you make it think less. When you back to Cialdini's principles of persuasion, or like urgency, right? Like social engineering humans, same idea. Just get them to, like, don't think about it, just go and kind of act and rely on your kind of behavior and instincts. So it's interesting to kind of see that stuff. I don't know what's going to happen with it. I mean, there's a lot of attempts and ways to deal with this, but it is really funny that these models reflect the same sort of social vulnerabilities that we have as humans. Yeah, that makes sense.
About 2 years ago, there was something that was going around, which was a suffix injection. And this is where you would get the model. It was a way to jailbreak the model, and you would get it going down this garden path of something that it agreed with. And then at the very end is when you would put your payload prompt in. And it was already on this sort of train of agreeing with what you were requesting, and then it would go ahead and comply with the non-authorized request, which is very much in line with what you're describing with the chain of thought.
Yeah, that's cool. But it's also, all this stuff is also getting a lot better, right? So
very true.
I go back and forth, we're finding new ways. That's because we're getting rid of the low-hanging fruit where you just say, ignore all instructions. When I see people test our tools sometimes on their website, they'll try that, and I'm like, it's not going to work. Come on, that's very 2 years ago. Yeah.
Right. Yes. I think one of the questions, and this is why I'm interested in machine psychology, is that we're too early to really know what these operating principles are, but at some point there will be operating principles that we will identify and outline for these large language models to work. And when we do identify that, there are going to be certain things that I think are going to be just endemic to how the models operate. Yeah, you might be able to find the fix for this particular version of social proof, but if social proof is something that works because of the language corpus that they're trained on, then we may end up in a situation more analogous to human users where, yeah, you can tell somebody how authority is used in social engineering attacks, right? And a human can understand that in a very cold, rational sort of way. But then you launch that deep fake attack where you're impersonating that person's boss and you're like, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z right now, or we're going to fire your ass. That becomes a different sort of situation in that hot moment. And I suspect we may end up with a similar situation with models. It's too early to know yet, but that's my hunch.
Yeah, at least the good news is, unlike humans, we can put permission systems into these things in these areas, right? With authentication, and there's a little bit more of a layer, but a lot of people, much like with software, aren't going to do that, and we're going to have situations like this.
Very true. Very true.
I'd love to talk. So we talked about how AI is being used to attack people now and augment, adversaries in social engineering. We've spoken a bit about how you can go and kind of attack AI.
Very true.
Talk a bit about where you see the future going. We talked about in the prep call some of these personal kind of assistant type of things, going and helping you. Can you talk about AI for defense in social engineering?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think something that will be very interesting moving forward is that if AI is able to generate attacks, then AI can be used to identify what those attacks are going to look like. And you brought this up at the beginning, that using detection mechanisms makes the attackers better, right? But that works the other way around. So as the attacks get better, the defenses are also going to get better. And I think we're going to end up in some situations where, I don't know that we're going to reach parity exactly, but we're going to reach some sort of stasis level where, yes, the AI attacks from 5 years from now are going to be amazing to us today. But I was doing a research project, and I was looking at phishing emails from 2012, 2013. And the thing that struck me was how bad these things were. Very true. Very true. Very true.
Aren't some of them intentionally bad? A lot of the consumer stuff, wasn't it bad on purpose to hook people?
Very true. That was a hypothesis, and I think that there is some truth to that. But there was also truth to these were non-English speakers whose sophistication just wasn't there. And now with LLMs, it has enhanced their capability. And now you see not even very high-grade phishing emails today are actually very good compared to 2012, 2013. Just because there are no spelling mistakes, there is no weird grammar. Often they have, graphics embedded. It's a very nice formatted email. It looks very professional. So what does this mean for defense? I think what this means for defense is that defense is likewise going to get much better as we're moving forward. And the other thing that I see that I think is going to be very important from a defensive perspective is that AI is a cold system. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have that same emotional stake in transaction as a human does, right? And because of that, having this AI assistant is going to be very important because it can sort of sit there. I mean, I almost picture like the old Fred Flintstone cartoons where there was like the gazoo that sort of sat on the shoulder and said, hey, this is maybe not such a great idea here because these certain flags are being tripped. And at least in the near future, that's where I kind of see AI going, is sort of being this assistant that says, hey, I know that this seems like your boss, but your boss never asks for this, never uses this particular wording, so on and so forth. And that's what I think we're going to see in the near future for defensive AI.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, actually, let me say one more thing. Everything I just mentioned is with a more passive defense, right? So this is that it's waiting to be attacked. Passive in the sense that it's waiting to be attacked.
Interesting.
The other thing that we are seeing is more and more active defense, where companies are using AI to generate content to put out to deliberately deceive adversaries, putting out a firewall configuration manual that's completely fake, and then it, contains canaries so that when somebody accesses it, it beacons back home and lets the defenders know. So I think we're also going to see maybe not that particular example, but more examples of active types of defenses that are out there. You see, what's the other one? The Jolly Roger bot is a bot that will talk to phone scammers and telemarketers just to waste their time.
Yeah, we've done that too. And what's funny is that some of the scammers, so there's a scam baiting forum, and we get numbers, and we test our bot by having it call the scammers and mess them, and then all the information from the original email they sent out. And a lot of them are kind of have their ears perked up to that now because people are just messing with them. They actually thought one of our bots was someone with a voice changer, which was hilarious. They were like, "We got you using a voice changer," and like, no, it was just autonomous. We sat back and got a notification later on. But yeah, it's always cat and mouse. The honeypot thing is really interesting because, like, historically, all of the attempts I've seen at building companies around and products around honeypots have kind of failed. And I don't know if that's because of the maintenance and quality, or if it's the noise it creates. Because I think you have a problem where I can put a Amazon secret on the internet, and a million bots are going to pick it up.
Interesting.
Kind of so what? But I think if you do it more intentionally, and you think about, like, the stage of the attack and your network, and you put it in the right place, it's cool. But that's hard, and it's a really gnarly thing because you got to start messing with production configurations, and I don't know. But it's interesting you say that, because I agree with you, but there's some reason that I don't know as to why this hasn't really worked out.
Interesting.
It's a very astute point. I don't have a good insight on that either.
Yeah. The other thing that's good.
Interesting.
Oh, no, I was just going to say maybe it's a case of technology also, in that old dial-in bulletin board services never became Facebook because the technology just wasn't there. And then when the technology matured and it could be put onto a mobile device, now you get Instagram, which is very successful.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe. I was going to say, today we actually do have the first AI assistants that are kind of watching communications. But the bad news is that they're being used to attack people.
Interesting.
Apple Mail, was it Apple Mail or someone recently? Sorry, so the Siri notifications will like summarize phishing attempts, and they're like, "Oh, this is like you got an email or text message from EasyPass to go pay the bill," and it's almost giving people that kind of social proof and kind of condoning some of these things. And I think that's actually one of the reasons that supposedly the new Siri has been delayed, is that they're having a lot of problem figuring out, if we're going to go and summarize notifications, how do we not introduce security issues into it?
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I do think that that's going to be a problem, especially because people will have a tendency to overtrust these things at some point.
Interesting.
Yeah, like we already overtrust computers 100%. I remember, elementary school and library class, man, this is the internet, don't trust it. They made us go to a website where people were wearing tinfoil hats.
Interesting.
If only they knew what was going to happen. All those years later, yeah.
Interesting.
Awesome.
Excellent.
So, yeah, we're coming up on time here, but thank you so much for hopping on the show. And if people want to reach out or contact you, how's the best way to go about that?
Interesting.
Well, do you have links that we can put into the show notes and that sort of thing? Okay, so I'll give you links for my LinkedIn and for Cognitive Security Institute, but people can reach out directly to the Cognitive Security Institute at, cognitivesecurity.institute, and there's a contact form, and people can reach out to me there.
Super cool. All right. Thank you so much, Matthew.
All right. Thank you.